And without a story, without a narrative, it's very difficult to be free because other people will write your narrative and decide who you are, which is a lot of the conflict that is happening, when in Africa, when, a lot of, let's say, Europeans or other people, Americans, are writing from their own viewpoint sometimes, which does not really fit the reality or the whole spectrum of reality. But as long as you don't do it yourself, somebody else is going to do it.
Hi, I'm Anders Bolling. Welcome to Mind the Shift, a podcast about a shifting and an integrating world. In this episode, we will dive into the world of art and creativity, and possibly a lot of other things outside the scope of my imagination. And we will visit West Africa. My guest today is Rania Odaymat. She is a Ghanaian artist, creative coach, art curator, a founding member of the Beyond Collective, and a part-time fashion stylist and creative director. Welcome to the show, Rania.
Thank you, Anders. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. I know you as the person with the most fabulous, mind-blowing hat creations I've seen in my entire life. And I know you also as an extremely supportive and a supportive course mate who engages in the most wonderful and insightful pep talk one can imagine. Your comments are always so to the point. But I don't know much about your life in Accra, Ghana. Can we maybe start off there by you telling us a little bit more about your life in Accra? And Odaymat, what kind of a name is that?
It's an Arabic name.
Sounded Dutch, but it's not Dutch. Okay, it's Arabic, yeah. So tell us more about your life in Accra.
So my life right now in Accra, what it's like, I guess.
Yeah, and are you born and raised in Accra or in Ghana?
Oh, yeah. This is home. My children are fifth generation, actually. So my ancestors came to Ghana before there was any Ghana. It was still the Gold Coast. And from the area that is now Lebanon, but at that time was not Lebanon. So Lebanon was not born. And since then, we've been here.
Okay. Yeah, Lebanon is a very recent creation.
Oh, yeah. Even Ghana. I mean, we forget we measure everything by the span of our lifetimes when entire nations and borders can completely change or, be reborn in a relatively very short time.
Yeah. And Ghana is, anyway, it's a very young creation, as you say, but with African standards, it's pretty old as a nation state. I think it was Ethiopia was never a colony, but otherwise, I think Ghana was the first to break free of colonization.
Yes, we were the first to get our peaceful independence. And that was it had a huge impact, actually, on so many other colonies. People like Martin Luther King came here to witness the independence. He has a very well-known speech about it. He took heart and he took hope for the civil rights movement in the U.S. So many, the first president, Kwame Nkrumah, was very much beyond his time in terms of vision and growth.
Yeah.
And so how is Ghana right now? I think it's sharing, on one level, it's sharing a lot with the rest of the world in terms of the pandemic and the repercussions of the pandemic and the huge economic toll and the financial toll and the human social toll, So from that perspective, I think we're all in one big boat.
Yeah.
How is it different? How is my life different? I don't think my life represents the life of every single Ghanaian person. Sometimes we forget that Africa is a huge continent and Ghana is a very big country. So living in Accra is completely different from living in Tamale, for example, or in Kumasi or in other big cities. It's the capital city. also depending on which neighborhood in Accra you live. I mean, there are many, many neighborhoods where there's no running water in the house, or you have to rely on outhouses. So again, there's a very big difference in experience in terms of life.
So what kind of neighborhood are you living in?
Well, right now I'm in East Legon, which is a residential neighborhood, which has sort of grown because Accra keeps growing. It's a big city. What I do here is, obviously, this is my home. My family's here, my childhood friends, my creative tribe. I work. Well, I live and I work and I create.
Are you having a lockdown right now, or are you?
No. Right now,
so you can walk around in the streets.
I mean, yeah, but yeah.
Are people wearing face masks?
I know, and so there's always this. Sometimes it feels like Orwellian in a way, because you're walking around, and then if you're not wearing a mask, people are like, "Oh my god," and then you see all of these people wearing masks. Some you don't even recognize, and they talk to you. You can't understand what they're saying because you don't see their body language and you can't hear them properly. And then you talk to them and they can't, and nobody realizes the absurdity of it. Like
it's totally absurd. It's like an art work, isn't it? The whole thing.
Yeah. Yes, like fiction, or like
something that this Bulgarian artist Christo was his name.
Yeah,
I think he died recently. He could have staged this. Okay. Well, I mentioned earlier here the different roles and jobs that you have, which you have told me I wouldn't have known otherwise. But what are you the most, would you say? I mean, are you the artist, the creative coach, the art curator, or the fashion stylist? What would you say is most
I
you?
wouldn't say any of them. I would say I'm a soul having a human experience. And then if I were to say something else afterwards, it would be an explorer, a seeker, and then it's a mother, a wife, a daughter, so many things. Yes, and afterwards creative or creator would come, and which sort of embraces all the other things that I do. I think, all of these roles are, okay, they can be helpful in terms of simplifying things, but then ultimately they don't really describe you as a person. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, that's beautiful. I couldn't agree more. I like it. I mean, it's part of the matrix, of course, but we're so used to using these concepts around who we are and what we do. But as you say, it can be practical to know what somebody works with if you're going to do some collaboration with that person or whatever.
What do I spend most time doing?
Yeah. What do you spend most time doing?
Out of these jobs, you mean? Yes, so probably the creating and the creative coaching.
Okay.
And why? It's out of choice. So with the others, for example, with the fashion styling, let's say, I won't take any job. I'm very particular. If it's a job that doesn't promote African aesthetics, if it's a job in fashion that doesn't resonate with me, for example, fashion and mental health or something else, I'm not interested really. Same thing with creative direction. But with the coaching, it resonates with my soul. That transfer of knowledge, which is very much needed. We don't have enough resources and support systems for creatives. And it's something that is very, very much needed. So, and we create the sort of environments we're in, right? You start with yourself. And if there's any way that I can share my knowledge and I can facilitate the knowledge and the process and the growth of someone else, I will always do it. This is something I made a commitment to do about 16 years ago, and I try to do as much as possible. The other thing is creating. So whether on my own or within the frame of the Beyond Collective, which is an art collective that um, we created with other friends. And why creating? Because for so many reasons. One of them is it was very much part of my healing process and my growth process. The second thing is it's fascinating to me. There's always room for me to grow and to learn and to dive into other forms of intelligence that are not necessarily always taught and developed in our educational systems or our cultural systems, let's say. For example, intuitive intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, the spiritual intelligence, and how they all come together with rhythmic, kinesthetic, and they're so dynamic and they feed on each other, and how you can use those to drive and generate your pursuit of insight and knowledge. So the creative process is a constant sort of discovery for me. This is why I want to keep on doing it. It's also something that helps me feel fulfilled and at peace and be able to consider from different dimensions, I guess.
You mentioned that this was a part of your healing. Do you mean to say that it's a general healing process, as many of us have over the course of a lifetime, or was there something that had happened in your life that made you feel that you needed healing? If you want to talk about that, you don't have to.
I believe it's all out there. There is no. I have absolutely no problem, talking about it. About 17 years ago, I had a crash of myself. I couldn't find the energy to get out of bed. I couldn't stand myself. I didn't feel that I was who I was supposed to be. I was basically living for others to respond to other people's perception of what identity is, what roles should I play, what is considered good or bad. And so I had constantly been repressing my inner voice and my inner self for a very, very long time. And sometimes a catalyst happens, an event happens, and it just, you get many, many cracks along the way. And then there's this one little tap that brings the whole thing falling down. And so this is what happened. And I made a choice to be better. And it was the moment when I said, you know what? I'm going to be true to myself, no matter who I lose or what I lose. And I'm going to listen to that voice. And so that's when my path of healing really started. And it was about re-educating myself, re-examining everything, re-educating myself, looking at my past conditioning, whether it's educational or social or family related, or, cultural, and creativity, going back into creativity was a huge part of that process.
Okay, and that what you have learned during that journey, you are now helping others discovering through your coaching? Is that what you're doing?
Yes. And then again, I try not to, it's sometimes when you're coaching, you have to be very aware not to project on anybody else. So yes, what I learned, I share, but then it's basically about the other person and their needs. And of course, being human, there are always resonances, and you always find common points or common grounds and things that you relate to with the other person. But I always try to allow the other person to drive their own coaching, let's say. I'm just the facilitator.
Yeah. And you have, of course, started this new podcast, Creative in Accra. And do you intend to use that as a ways of as a means of, so to speak, weaving together all these creative threads that you have out there?
Yes, it's a way for me to expand the breadth and scope of what I do. So it's not typically creative coaching, but I actually bring my skills as a creative coach into it. It's not exactly writing or poetry, but then I bring my skills as a wordsmith into it. It's not exactly also as an artist. I work with visual performance. It's always what I wear and what I do is a type of
yeah, we've seen the hats.
yes, and so there's always this conversation happening. It's a way to make people aware that whether I'm wearing this hat or not, there's always a three-way conversation happening between us that is nonverbal. So when you do it this way, you sort of choose, what am I saying? What am I emphasizing at this point? And so I also bring those skills. So we end up, bringing everything, who we are and what we do, into a new sort of, dimension or creation or medium, let's say.
1 + 1 equals 3, as they say sometimes.
Oh, yes. And not even that. I think, this is one of my podcasts and one of my conversations with a very, very dear friend of mine who's like a brother and who's an artist. He says, you know what? One of the greatest fallacies in our educational system is the math. The fact that they teach our children that 1 + 1 = 2 every time. They should tell them 1 + 1 = 2 when you're studying math that was created in this specific way, but it doesn't always apply to life. And he gives examples. He says, take two people, 1 + 1, you and a partner, let's say. Sometimes it equals 1 because you decide to imprint and become one. Sometimes it equals 1 because you end up leaving each other, and it's 1. Other times you have a kid, so 1 + 1 = 3. Other times you have more kids, you can adopt other kids, whatever. And he says this basic definition of oversimplification of 1 + 1 = 2 every single time doesn't help also with collaboration. Because if somebody grows up on that notion, if I think that if I'm going to collaborate with you, Anders, 1 + 1 = 2, we're going to end up with 1 each. Whereas if I know that in creativity, we can achieve more than the sum of our parts. If I collaborate with you and we get 6 or 7, you can have 3, I can have 3, and we can give 1 to support somebody else.
Exactly. I mean, 1 + 1 can equal 1 million if you create a giant, what do I know, company or organization or something that works for the whole world. It can equal just as... I think that was beautifully said. I've never thought of it that way, but math is maybe a little bit of an obstacle here when we talk about creativity and social interaction. So great. You mentioned before different kinds of intelligence in the context of creativity. I think you said a little bit about it, but can you elaborate on that a little bit more? That's really interesting. Different kinds of intelligence. What is that?
Yeah, a typical example. Take someone like the boxer Muhammad Ali. Okay, he was given an IQ test at one point in his life, and based on that IQ test, he was considered to be slightly retarded, lacking in human intelligence, and he scored below the norm, But then, what was never taken into consideration was what had been his schooling and his exposure. Whether it was, and also measuring that academic intelligence as his value, when looking at his life, you realize that Muhammad Ali had amazing kinesthetic intelligence, which is the intelligence that has to do with how you relate to your body and how you move your body in space and other objects, and then he had amazing interpersonal intelligence, being able to connect and to read the other. Interpersonal and intrapersonal in terms of having a growth mindset and being able to motivate himself. He could speak so well for himself. He was very articulate in some ways. So you don't have an average or normal individual. But when you look at it from a very narrow needle and standpoint of academic intelligence and how it is measured by our so-called experts, you can see a nobody or nothing, which he was told he was, when this is a guy that has inspired and achieved and brought so much. And it applies to so many people and so many things. So this is why I'm saying, we don't, and looking at the brain and how it works and the nature of intelligence, which is dynamic, I don't think we are making the most of our human potential. Most schools still focus on academic intelligence when in very fast changing time like these, we need a lot of creative intelligence, because the one who's going to survive is the one with the highest capacity for change and to recreate yourself and adapt and find solutions to very fast rising problems. And whether you're an artist or not, if you're not trained creatively to tap into that inner creator that you have, and which then puts you in touch with your intuitive intelligence, which every kid has. Why do you look at kids and see that they have very high emotional or intuitive intelligence, but then the moment they understand, without actually being able to intellectualize it or put it in terms of logic, they know who loves them, who doesn't. They know who's at threat. If there's anything happening between the parents, they feel the vibes. They know exactly what is wrong, And yet, when kids start going to school, slowly they lose that, or they stop trusting that.
Yeah, they're not encouraged to enhance it and develop.
Yes, but then when you develop and invest in your spiritual intelligence, your intuitive intelligence, and all of the possible other intelligences, they collaborate and raise each other up and give you a completely different potential from the one you have if you only focus on one aspect of human intelligence.
Sure. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I think you're right there. We're focusing too much on the academic intelligence. But did you know that actually the classic IQ measure, the IQ numbers that we maybe shouldn't be measuring as much as we do, but if we just look at those, they have actually increased over the last 5 or 6 or 7 decades.
Have you? Why? Do you know why?
Yeah, there is a guy, New Zealand professor of psychology, I think, or sociology, I can't remember. He's called James Flynn, and this is called the Flynn effect because he was the guy who discovered this in the 80s. They were comparing cohorts of I think military conscripts. Anyway, somehow he discovered that the numbers, that the average IQ had risen, and he checked other countries and came to the conclusion that they had gone up in almost all the Western countries. And later, it was discovered that it had also risen in countries like India and in Eastern Asia, and I think also in countries in Africa. And the explanation is, well, there are different explanations. One is the little bit boring explanation that people are more educated, formally educated today than before. So people tend to know what they're asking for, but these tests are not just verbal, of course, and to write down answers to questions. It's about knowing how to recognize different shapes and things like that. But that's one explanation, that people are more all over the world are more formally educated, so that they can understand how to think in these matters. But the more interesting explanation is that and it's connected maybe to some extent to the formal education also, that we are more we are more prone to think hypothetically today. We are better at thinking hypothetically, which is good news if you want to have people being able to be empathic and understand how others have it. I mean, you can kind of because when you ask people in the 1890s or 1900s or 1910s, what's the if you gave them, for instance, well, let's say the question was, here's a dog and here's a rabbit. What's their common denominator? Well, there's nothing. They would say there's no connection whatsoever. This is a rabbit and this is a dog, and well, the dog might chase the rabbit. That's all that they could think of. People living in the countryside in many countries, but today people would say that, well, they have 4 legs and they both have 4 legs and they are both what's the word?
Mammals.
Mammals, exactly. Lots of things. Anyway, but maybe a bad example. But I think when I spoke to James Flynn about this, sorry for this rant.
Don't worry.
But he was talking about this ability to think hypothetically, which I thought was really interesting. So just a sidetrack on IQ. But I agree with you that we should actually measure other types of intelligence. So creativity and art. There is art. I mean, art is a part of this, but creativity can be so many things. But you are creating art, and people have a pretty narrow, I think, picture of what art is. How would you describe art? What is art to you, and what significance has art in the context of creativity?
I think it has many values. One of them is our first president, again, didn't believe that we could ever truly exercise our freedom and grow if we didn't invest in our arts and culture. Why? Because your arts create your narrative. And without a story, without a narrative, it's very difficult to be free, because other people will write your narrative and decide who you are, which is a lot of the conflict that is happening, when in Africa, when, a lot of, let's say, Europeans or other people, Americans, are writing from their own viewpoint sometimes, which does not really fit the reality or the whole spectrum of reality. But as long as you don't do it yourself, somebody else is going to do it. So from that perspective, it's about actually exercising your freedom and your growth. This is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is art is healing. Art is healing. It's an introspective tool as well, because going through the process, sometimes through artworks, you articulate and provide people with new insights, or you can create a new conversation or change the conversation, or put them face to face with a new perception, let's say. So these are some of the major ones, like introspective tool of personal, national, whatever articulation, also healing, for healing, and growth.
What kind of art inspires you the most?
Art, to be able to create art, you have to think creatively. And creative thought is... Hello, Anders?
Yes, I'm here.
And
I think you lost me a bit there.
Yeah. Creative thought, I think, is necessary for our survival as a human species, for change, because, if the only thing that makes us survive is our ability to change. And if you keep on doing the same things and you don't think outside of the box, it's very difficult to change. And I think there were studies that were made, everybody has an inner creator, has a capacity to be creative. Doesn't mean you're going to be an artist. It's just that our educational system, again, and parenting methods don't really value that and and develop that, help us develop that. But as a creator, every human being, we physically do that by having babies, but we also do it through in many, many ways. Sometimes we recreate ourselves within our lifetime. Part of your character dies, another one is reborn. You go through growth. And if you look at everything organic around you, whether you sit in the ocean, you float in the ocean, or whether you walk in a forest, or whether you look into your own body, cells are dying and recreating. Everything is in a constant flow of creation and creativity.
Change is the only constant.
Yes, and that birth and death and creation, cycle of creation and creativity, because there's a dynamic of things, and it resonates. We resonate with all of that around us. So why don't we I think we need, when we connect to that aspect of ourselves, it can be immensely powerful.
Yeah.
And yet we're not, encouraged to enough.
No,
However,
we're not.
Use it. You can use it by you can use it by applying creativity to entrepreneurship, or to social studies, or to psychology, to education, anything.
Yeah. I sometimes think that there are two major forces in the universe, and I'm not the only one who says this, and that's love and fear. And love is the creative force, and fear is the destructive force. And maybe we need both. We need to build and we need to destruct in order to see that we have to build. You understand this. But I think that nothing is actually created without love. And that could entail, anything from the smallest, tiniest little pet project you have to gigantic, what do I know, space projects or anything, or the love for creating a family or whatever. I think love is the basic force behind creativity. I think you agree with me.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
So, and also to stay on this slightly philosophical path, do you think that what we visualize that we want to create, and i.e. materialize in the future, what we call future, that this actually already exists somewhere at some point in space-time, in the moment we visualize it? Do you believe that that's the fact? That's the thing.
I think it's possible. I think it's very possible. I also think, based on some experiments that were done, when you like take the shape of a wave, let's say, or a frequency, and it's in a vacuum or alone, not in a vacuum, but there is no consciousness standing there looking at it, not even speaking. It behaves in a specific way. The moment there's a conscious person or being or eyes there, even if they don't move or don't do anything, it changes the behavior of the frequency.
Oh, you're referring to the quantum physics thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I really think that we have the capacity to manifest so many things. And yes, again, you've got all the theories and string physics. For me, one I can read you something that really resonates with me. I don't know if it makes sense to you, but this is something fun. And you find it in old texts by Ali bin Abi Talib, who wrote, I'm translating from Arabic, your sickness is from you, but you do not perceive it. And your remedy lies within you, but you do not sense it. You presume you are a small entity, but within you lies the greater universe. You are indeed the evident book by whose letters the hidden becomes manifest. You have no need to look beyond yourself. What you seek is within, if only you would reflect.
That's beautiful.
And I think I personally, this makes sense with all of these, theories. Again, in science and physics, theories are born and theories change. But if you look at it from a perspective, and he was not the only one. If you go back into esoteric studies, if you go back into specific spiritual cultures across board, like comparative, this is not, it's there. It's there. If you look at Carl Jung's work in modern psychology, the notion of the collective unconscious and all of that, I do think that you would be able to, and look as well at, what they say about the brain. We only use less than 10%, less than 7% of our brain. So what is all the rest? Obviously, all the rest is not trash or rubbish. It could be if you want it to be.
Yeah,
but
I see. Yeah, I see the brain more like a TV set, actually, because I don't think that consciousness resides in the brain. But yeah,
no,
anyway,
it doesn't. I mean, I don't think any of us look. If you take I worked as a dream interpreter for about 2 years on a site called Freudit, and we had dreamers from all around the world. And what happens in dreams is perceived by our central nervous system and our memory banks exactly the same way as a reality, a real event.
Yeah, wow.
Awake.
You can measure that. Yeah.
It's measured in the same way. There is no variation. But then when you look at many, many, many dreamers, you realize that the notions that we have while awake of space and time don't apply to our dreams. The notions that we have about memory and retrieval of knowledge don't apply in dreams. So much of what we consider logical doesn't apply in dreams. There is the language of dreams, but it doesn't follow. It doesn't follow the same logic, and yet, to our central nervous system, they are measured as real as each other. So I think that it's however much you open your mind, and whatever you can imagine is possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too.
In terms of reality, because I think we have a hand in creating our own realities. Otherwise, when you look at in psychology, healing, or therapy, so many times, like in self-image therapy, for example, when people heal their self-image, it completely changes their life direction and their experiences and the kinds of events that happen in their lives. And Salvador Dali, the famous artist, has a work around it called Darkness and Light. And he shows this, and it's a very naive, simple sort of sketch, but it shows, but extremely deep and complex, because it shows your self-image as this huge figure in the sky that's bigger than the sun and pulling a little tiny boat in the sea that it represents your life direction.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Yeah, I think there are so many layers inside of us that we can access if we really just try to do that and realize that, as you say, we are not separate from each other. I think actually scientists are now, frontline scientists in some sectors are talking about the unified field. And there are, well, you mentioned string theory. I'm really not an expert on this, but it's so fascinating. I hope to be able to invite people who can talk about these things on my podcast, because I think it's so fascinating that what they're talking about now, the unified field and all that, is very similar to what spiritual books have been talking about for thousands of years, actually, that everything is connected and that there is no such thing as void. So the space is just replete with energy. It's just packed with energy, and we are just more or less dense manifestations of that energy. Because you know that 99.99999% of my finger here is just what we would call nothingness, but it's not nothing. It's this field of energy, but in terms of atoms and electrons and molecules, it's not much there, really. So I think it's wonderful to think that way, because that makes it easier to understand that we are all, it's just waves of energy that's floating around us all the time. And I think that creativity could probably help us to reach that insight. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's not only creativity. I think it's seeking through the creative process, through creative means, through applied creativity, seeking through connecting to your spiritual self, seeking through connecting to your own body as a messenger, because so much of the pain that we contain in our body is actually full of information about our feelings, our limitations, our prejudices, and I've seen a lot of healers know immediately, when, not a lot, there are not many of them, but then some do it. They know immediately after meeting a person for 5 minutes that, okay, that person feels helpless. There's a situation that makes them, just because of how they hold themselves, or because of how a specific muscle behaves, or because of their posture, or because of...
Or maybe their aura.
Yes, or the microfacial expressions, even beyond, of course, the aura is so important. But then some people will tell you, okay, I believe in the aura. Others will say, I don't believe in the aura. But then when you take it from a muscle perspective, which is cool, it's like they hold...
More people will buy into that than the aura thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, I buy into all. I
but I think...
But
as you say, if you want to convince people that these things, that healers can see these things, you can exemplify, like you say, with how the muscles or the posture is.
I mean, it's happened. If you touch sometimes for a specific person who's carrying something specific, there's a point you can touch their foot and press, and they can scream. They're holding something inside, and they're not, but without their awareness, what you carry is what tells that story on your body everywhere. Why do people struggling with depression or mental health illness, one of the first symptoms is pains in their body, in their muscle? Whenever you touch them, it's painful, cannot stand to be touched.
It's all connected. So one of the starting points of my podcast is that that these are crucial times. It doesn't say really crucial times in the intro text, but a starting point is that we are living in a shifting world and an integrating world. And you mentioned before the interview that you are not convinced that we are necessarily living in crucial times. Because we are experiencing adversity, of course, with the pandemic and all those things that are happening. And I also recognize that humanity has gone through many crises of that type before, many times. But I think there is something special, something particular about this time, in the fact that we are integrating, that the whole planet is connecting for the first time in history, and this has really not happened before. Don't you think that this has some kind of impact? Would you and I, for instance, have been able to meet without this world of connectivity and connection? I don't think so.
No.
And don't you think this will have some kind of impact on humanity and where we are going from here ahead?
I don't think it's in that. I think it's in our consciousness, because what you're describing can be an amazing advantage, you and I connecting, because we're connecting from a point of love and growth and appreciation and sharing. But you can also connect from a point of destruction, which we see this connection and media being used to globally manipulate people and to globally drive towards insecurity, fear, and a lot of negativity. So every weapon that has a potential, you said it before, to build also has the same capacity to destroy. And yes, you and I are now using it in a constructive way, but while we're doing so, so many are using it to control and to manipulate. And so that's why I say, take words, for example. Words can be weapons, and words can be a bomb and healing. And it's not the word itself, it's how you use it and how you make the other person feel. So I think, yes, there is this great advantage, maybe unprecedented, because, again, some studies and theories show that we might not have been the only ones in history, but then, that's another discussion.
Yeah, if you go back many thousands of years, yes.
So let's say, although it might be false, that this unprecedented, connectivity is happening. This could be the means to control us as well.
But either way, it indicates that we are living in crucial times, maybe?
Well, yes.
Crucial doesn't mean good or bad. It means just that it's something.
Yes, they are. I agree. For me, it's both crucial and non-crucial. Not crucial, depending on which perspective. Crucial, yes, because our future depends on the kind of consciousness we develop right now, the kind of what we drive towards right now. And obviously, if we keep on behaving in automatic, subconscious ways, of how we've been programmed to, or if we keep on behaving from a place of fear is not conscious. Fear comes from the subconscious mainly. And so we won't be going anywhere good, and it's crucial because of that. But then, is it more crucial than other times in history? I think, if we take the Spanish plague, there's so many events in history that felt or were experienced in a similar manner, even if the tools were not exactly the same. But in terms of humanity and human pain or experience or feeling that it's the end of the world and we're living in, So that's why I meant yes and no. No, it's not more crucial than other such events, but yes, it is in a way, because
we can't get away.
Yes, will affect where we end up and what kind of experience we end up having. Or our children, or,
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. This has been a fascinating and very, very interesting conversation. What are your dreams and goals for the future, for yourself and for Ghana and the world? Well, you can start with yourself.
For myself, my dream and the long-term goal is to always keep on learning how to love better, how to both give and receive love better. I don't think that it's a lesson that it's a very, very, very big non-ending lesson. I think our gold lies in our human connection. Because in Arabic, if you take the name of human being, insan, and the root of it, it implies a connection and a befriending. And I think for us to experience the fullest measure of our humanity, we need to engage, which modern life has sort of restricted, and more is encouraging isolation. But isolation is the worst thing for mental health. And isolation, because it affects our mental health, affects our growth, and affects that connection, and will affect how we experience our humanity. So for me, that goal is always at the top of my head. How can I love better? How can I accept better? How can I break all the barriers that stand in the face of love in my psyche, in my heart, in my mind, and It's a never ending. And how can I have the best quality of connections and relationships that I can have?
Fantastic. Beautiful. Now, can you please tell us where can people find your podcast and your other creative sites or websites or whatever?
I've been very internet shy, so I've always chosen not to have a website. I have an Instagram account, which is more of a communications page, but I sometimes will post some of the events or things that I'm doing, a bit of this and a bit of that. I've also recently created a new Instagram page for my Creative in Accra podcast, as well as a Facebook page, which I Creative in Accra, and a personal Facebook page, which I only did because of the group, because
the podcast course,
the podcast course. Otherwise, my podcast is on Anchor, iTunes, Spotify, depending on the region that's there.
Yeah, and it's Creative in Accra.
Yes, creative.
And that's ACCRA.
Yes.
Capital of Ghana. Thank you so much for being my guest, Rania Odaymat.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.